I was trapped in a flood along with my pilot husband's beloved first lover. After hesitating, he chose to save me, who was pregnant. First, when he went back to rescue his first lover, it was already too late. He could only watch helplessly as she was swept away by the raging waters. He blamed me for delaying the rescue and causing her death. He hated me for 7 years and never allowed our son to call him dad. On the day the time machine was launched, he abandoned everything and insisted on returning to the past. Elise, if I hadn't worried about being criticized for saving you first, how could I have possibly chosen you over Helen? After he left, my in-laws pinned all the blame on me. If only Louise had saved Helen first, at least they would have been happy now. Even my own son rejected me. It's all your fault that Aunt Helen died. That's why Dad hates me. Why wasn't it you who died back then? Facing everyone's hatred, I made up my mind to go back to the past. This time, I would save myself. I would owe Louise nothing. Chapter 1. The dizziness caused by the time machine slowly faded, leaving only the numbing coldness from being soaked in floodwaters. I felt as if I was about to die. I struggled to open my eyes, only to see Louise standing on a small wooden boat, staring at me with indifference. Our eyes met, but he didn't hesitate for a second. He turned the boat around and headed toward Helen, who was stranded on a rooftop. The powerful current nearly swept me away. I clung tightly to a piece of driftwood, using all my strength to swim toward safety. Just as I was about to reach a safe zone, Louise's boat passed by me. Helen staggered and almost fell into the water. In order to steady her, Louise abandoned the oar, and the boat crashed directly into me. The sharp pain in my abdomen nearly made me let go. But Louise, as if blind to my struggle, anxiously helped Helen reach the shore. When I finally dragged myself ashore, coughing violently, Louise, who had already rescued Helen, walked over to me and coldly said, "Elise, you could have saved yourself. You stayed in the water on purpose just to force me to save you first, didn't you? You made me lose the chance to save Helen." The icy disdain in his eyes made me shudder. He didn't realize that I, too, had traveled back in time. "Are you going to run to my parents and tattle again? Say whatever you want about me, but if you dare to slander Helen, even with my parents backing you, I won't forgive you." Clutching my agonizing stomach, I looked up at Louise and said, "Let's get a divorce." A flash of shock crossed Louise's face. He paused for a second, then impatiently frowned. "I have more important things to deal with. I don't have time for your nonsense." "I'm not being childish," I said calmly. "I mean it." Before Louise left in the previous life, he said that besides regretting not saving Helen first, there was another thing he regretted deeply: listening to his family's wishes and marrying me. I didn't want history to repeat itself. I would help him make up for both of his regrets. Louise didn't believe a word I said. His eyes grew colder and more impatient. "Now that my parents aren't around, you don't have to keep acting," he sneered. "You're just using the excuse of a divorce to make them hate Helen even more. Drop the pathetic tricks. Stop using something as serious as divorce as a bargaining chip for your tantrums. I'll take you to the hospital first." Louise gave me a warning glance, clearly telling me not to cause any more trouble. The pain in my abdomen intensified sharply. Just as I was about to take his outstretched hand to stand up, Helen rushed over and shoved me aside. She threw herself into Louise's arms, sobbing. "Louise." Ben swallowed a lot of water while protecting me. "He's not doing well. Can you please take him to the vet first?" Faced with Helen's tearful plea, Louise didn't hesitate at all. He immediately agreed. Only when he glanced back at me did he seem to remember he had said he would take me to the hospital. Seeing this, Helen fell to her knees in front of me, pleading, "Elise, you're not seriously hurt anyway. Please let Louise take Ben to the vet first. I really can't lose him." Ben was the dog that Louise and Helen had adopted together. Louise looked at me with a fleeting trace of guilt. "I'll find someone with a bicycle to take you to the hospital," he said. "After I take Helen and Ben to the vet, I'll come find you." I remained calm and answered, "All right, go ahead." Louise gave me a surprised look, but Helen's urgent urging didn't allow him to think too much. He got into the Jeep and drove away with Helen and Ben. After they left, I turned around and looked at the hem of my dress. As expected, it was stained completely with blood. When I finally made it to the hospital, the doctor informed me coldly that I had arrived too late. The child couldn't be saved. Chapter 2. in the previous life. Because Luis had saved me first, the child was unharmed. After our son was born, Luis never once held him. Aside from providing money for our living expenses, he completely ignored our existence. Even gifts our son carefully prepared for him were discarded without a second thought. I still remember how my son once cried and asked me, "Why do other kids get birthday presents from their dads, but Luis won't even buy me candy?" Back then, I couldn't understand it either, until one day, I accidentally overheard Luis telling our son, "Don't call me Dad. I will never acknowledge you as my son." Our son burst into tears, devastated. Luis coldly pulled out a tiny bundle of yellow fur he had kept all these years. "Because you were sick," he said. "Everyone was rushing to take you to the hospital." In the chaos, Ben got lost. I couldn't even protect Helen properly, and now Ben is gone too. If I had another chance, Luis murmured bitterly, I would protect Helen and Ben with everything I have, even if it meant losing my own child. My thoughts returned to the present. I wiped away my tears calmly. From the moment I came back, I had already decided to divorce Luis. I never intended to keep this child. I finished writing the divorce papers in my hospital room and carefully tucked them away. Just as I was done, Luis returned, carrying a shopping bag filled with trendy toys. "I saw these new arrivals at the store on my way here," he said, smiling. "I thought they might sell out soon, so I bought some for our future child." Luis eagerly showed me the toys one by one, his eyes gleaming with a faint hope for the child's future. "How's Ben doing?" I asked. Luis's smile froze. He scratched his head awkwardly and nodded. "The vet said he'll be fine. Please don't tell my parents about what happened today. I'm afraid they'll misunderstand Helen again. If you help me keep this quiet, I'll agree to anything you want." So that was it. The toys weren't for our child at all. They were just a bargaining chip to make sure I wouldn't cause trouble for Helen. As I lowered my head, my eyes caught a glimpse of the label on one of the toys. "For dogs only." In that instant, it felt like something was blocking my chest, making it hard to breathe. So these toys were actually meant for Ben. Imported toys. Expensive and exquisite. Luis really spared no expense for Helen. "Anything I want?" I turned my face away, hiding the tears welling up in my eyes. Luis nodded firmly. I pulled out the divorce agreement, covering the written content and only exposing the signature line. "Then sign this." "What is it?" "Just a simple agreement," I replied lightly. "A promise that you'll never fall in love with anyone else." Luis had always seen me as childish. In the past, I had often come up with silly ideas like this, so he didn't suspect a thing. He signed it immediately, watching his name appear on the paper. I finally exhaled in relief. Luis once saved me from darkness. Now, I was giving him back his freedom, so he could choose the life he truly wanted. Our families had been close friends for generations. Luis and I had known each other since we were little. At first, my life was as peaceful and beautiful as Luis's, until one day, my mother suddenly passed away, and my father remarried. From that moment, I fell straight from heaven into hell. Under the instigation of my stepmother, my father refused to give me any living expenses, not even basic necessities. At school, classmates mocked me for wearing oversized, tattered men's clothes. When I felt utterly humiliated, it was Luis who stood up for me, blocking the red ink splashed toward me, and fiercely scolding those who ridiculed me. He even said that he, too, wore hand-me-downs from relatives, and that there was nothing shameful about it. That day, the dignity I thought was completely shattered was gently picked up by Luis, and we became even closer. Later, my stepmother gave birth to a son. Unwilling to bear the burden of 2 children, my father and stepmother pushed me into a lake. When I was on the verge of drowning, it was Luis who jumped in and pulled me out. After my father and stepmother were arrested, Luis took the initiative to bring me to his home and begged his parents to cover my tuition, so that I wouldn't end up homeless. Chapter 3. Luis pulled me out of the abyss again and again, making me believe our bond was different from the rest of the world. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I realized it far too late. Luckily, now, I had the chance to choose differently. Mom and Dad said they prepared your favorite food. They haven't seen you in a while. They're waiting for us to have dinner together. But just as we arrived at the gate, One of Helen's friends rushed over and whispered something to Elise. Helen was so traumatized by what happened today that she's terrified to even use water. She can't cook. So I'm going over to make her some dinner. After Elise left, I stayed behind and ate with his parents. We had just finished eating and were getting ready to head home when Elise's mother, who had gone out, returned with a grim face. Elise went to see Helen again, didn't he? Seeing my indifferent expression, she slapped the green beans onto the table with frustration. Didn't you say he was busy at work? I just went to your aunt's house to pick up some beans and overheard Helen boasting in the courtyard about Elise cooking dinner for her. I really don't know what's so special about that Helen. Elise is completely obsessed with her. If I weren't worried that Elise might lose his temper and do something reckless, I would have already told him that Helen has been married before. I remained calm. I had known about Helen's past for a long time. Elise's parents had told me in secret. Helen had concealed it very well. If it hadn't been for a sheer accident, even Elise's parents wouldn't have known. Helen's husband had treated her badly, and she had fled to the city to escape. Elise's parents never told him the truth, fearing that if he found out, he might confront Helen's ex-husband, get into trouble, and lose his job. It wasn't until after I married Elise that I learned the full story. That was why, in my previous life, I never once thought of divorcing him. But now, in this life, I chose to let go. Whatever Elise decided to do, it was his choice. I would no longer entangle myself in this messy love. Elise, my mother-in-law said, sighing heavily. I know you've suffered. When we insisted on you marrying Elise, it was because we truly believed his feelings for you were different. But now, sigh. I looked calmly at my mother-in-law and said with a gentle smile, Elise helped me back then probably because he's kind-hearted. Not because he liked me. We misunderstood his intentions and forced ourselves into his life. Since being together only made everyone unhappy, it's better to separate sooner rather than later. Separate? My in-laws exclaimed in shock. Yes, I said softly. Elise has already signed the divorce papers I prepared. As soon as they're submitted and approved, we'll be officially divorced. But please, don't tell Elise for now. I don't want him to feel obligated to stay because of a misplaced sense of responsibility. As I thought about the 7 years Elise and I had spent together, living like polite strangers under one roof, a messy, aching pain surged through my heart. That night, just as I was about to go to sleep, the door was violently kicked open. I looked up and met Elise's furious gaze. Elise, you really ran crying to my parents, didn't you? You won't stop until Helen is forced out of my life. Chapter 4. If you hadn't tattled, my parents wouldn't have gone to Helen, and Ben wouldn't have run away because of their argument. Ben ran away? Panic instantly flooded my chest. Was I still unable to change the ending after all? Think about it, Elise. Elise snapped. You're pregnant too. You know the pain of losing a child. Helen losing Ben is no different. Could you stop being so selfish for once? You started this mess. You must make it up to Helen. If we can't find Ben, then you should be prepared to lose your baby as well. His words stabbed into my heart like knives. No one knew better than I did what it felt like to lose a child. Except, Elise didn't yet know that I had already lost ours. I'll find Ben, I said, turning to leave. Behind me, Elise let out a cold laugh. Stop pretending to be the good one. Finding Ben is the least you owe. Don't think I'll forgive you for doing what you should have done anyway. I searched near Helen's house, the window lights still burning bright. Through the window, two figures, Elise and Helen, held each other tightly. The night was freezing. My body, weakened from the miscarriage, was already at its limit. After searching for over an hour, dizziness blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep going. I had to find Ben. Only then would my debt to Elise be truly settled. Only then could we part cleanly, owing each other nothing. By dawn, I finally found Ben tied up in an abandoned courtyard, shivering violently on the cold stone floor, dragging my exhausted body. I brought Ben back. When I returned, I saw Elise tenderly wiping tears from Helen's face. Ben, Helen, look! Helen rushed over and hugged Ben tightly. When Elise turned toward me, as if to say something, Helen clung to him and sobbed. Elise, Ben looks like he's caught a chill. They say it's really dangerous for dogs to get sick. Please take him to the vet. I can't lose him. Luis hesitated for a moment when he saw my weakened body, swaying on the verge of collapse. Seeing this, I quickly steadied myself against the wall. "I'm fine," I said. "You should take them to the vet first." Without a word, Luis helped Helen and left. As they disappeared into the distance, my vision went black and I collapsed. When I woke up in the hospital, Luis was sitting by my bed, looking deeply worried. "If you weren't feeling well, why didn't you say anything?" he said, frowning. "Or were you trying to make my parents find out, just to cause more trouble for Helen?" Judging by his reaction, it seemed he still didn't know about the miscarriage. Relieved, I quietly exhaled. "Last night, I admit I lost my temper," Luis said, softening his tone slightly. "But I was really worried Helen might do something stupid over Ben. I had no choice but to stay with her." "I'm sorry." Hearing his apology, I let out a soft laugh. Luis looked at me, puzzled, his eyes silently asking why. "You've always been soft-hearted," I said lightly. "That's why you helped me when we were kids, out of pity, not affection. You must regret it now, right? If you hadn't helped me back then, you wouldn't have ended up marrying me." He froze for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "I've never regretted anything I've done. You really overthink too much. I bought you your favorite shredded pork noodles. Eat a little, okay?" Luis opened the lunchbox, and the fragrant smell filled the room. Just as I reached for the chopsticks, Helen walked into the hospital room. "Luis, my stomach hurts. I think I'm starving. Could I have the noodles instead?" Chapter 5. Immediately, my stomach rumbled loudly in protest, but Luis, without hesitation, handed the noodles to Helen and explained to me, "Helen has a stomach condition. Could you switch meals with her just this once?" Before he even finished speaking, Helen added with a feigned look of surprise, "Oh, but my food spilled on the floor earlier. Though the floor isn't too dirty. If Elise doesn't mind, I can bring it over for her." Luis turned to me awkwardly. "Elise, I'll go get you something else later," he started to say, but Helen quickly interrupted. "Luis, the doctor said I need to get some blood tests soon. Can you come with me? I'm scared of needles." Luis had only returned to the hospital later that afternoon. When he saw the empty lunchbox on the table, he gave me an apologetic look. "I forgot to bring you food, but it's good you already ate." Then he added, "Seriously, I promise, I won't divorce you. But please, stop making things difficult for Helen." Bitterness flooded my heart, but I said nothing, perhaps out of guilt. Luis made an effort to chat with me for a while. "The doctor said the first 3 months are risky. I'll come home every night to cook for you from now on. What do you think? Will our baby be a boy or a girl?" "You're looking forward to the baby?" I asked softly. "Of course. Babies are so precious." The tenderness in his eyes as he spoke made my breath hitch. So he had truly longed for this child, yet he would end up hating that very child for 7 long years. Just then, a nurse hurried in. "Who's Luis? Helen is your family, right?" She suddenly ran up to the hospital rooftop. "She seems very unstable." Before the nurse even finished her sentence, Luis had already rushed out of the room. I looked down at the 4 needle he had ripped from my hand and let out a bitter laugh. Later, in the hallway, I happened to see him returning while carrying Helen in his arms. When he saw me, his eyes were filled with rage and disgust. "Elise, how could you slander Helen by saying she was married before? Do you realize you could ruin her life with that kind of accusation? If you can say such things about Helen," I said calmly, "then should I also say that the baby I'm carrying belongs to another man?" Luis's gaze flickered when he saw the blood dripping from my hand. For a moment, it seemed he realized something, but there was no apology in his eyes. My attending doctor looked like he wanted to say something, but Luis ignored him, leaving with Helen without another glance at me. At that moment, I understood. It was time for me to leave. After completing my discharge paperwork, I quietly packed my belongings and walked away. After sending Helen home and calming her down, Luis finally remembered to return to the hospital to look for me. There, he ran into my attending doctor. When he learned I had already been discharged, he frowned in displeasure. "Still running around recklessly while pregnant. Completely hopeless." "Pregnant?" The doctor raised an eyebrow. "You don't know? The day of the flood, Elise suffered an abdominal injury. She arrived too late at the hospital. The baby couldn't be saved. Chapter 6. Impossible, Luis blurted out. His voice cracked with urgency. He stared blankly at the doctor, repeating impossible under his breath, while his entire body trembled uncontrollably with fear. The doctor calmly handed him my medical records. See for yourself. I have no reason to lie. Luis flipped through the records with trembling hands. His eyes turned bloodshot, and the papers were nearly crushed in his grip. Impossible. This can't be real, he kept muttering hoarsely. The doctor seemed to want to say more, but Luis had already bolted out of the hospital like a man possessed. He rushed home but didn't find me there, so he hurried to his parents' house instead. Is Elise here? I need to talk to her. His parents looked like they were about to respond, but then they caught sight of the medical records in his hand. Their expressions immediately darkened with disappointment. Now we finally understand, his father said heavily. We finally know why Elise insisted on divorcing you. Divorce? Luis's heart tightened with panic. When did I ever agree to divorce her? Elise said you already signed the divorce papers. She submitted them to your supervisor the day she came back for dinner. No matter how we tried to persuade her, she wouldn't change her mind. Now, everything makes sense. Tell us, what exactly happened that day? Luis's mother was trembling with anger and tears. Luis stood frozen, his voice dry and hollow. Didn't Elise tell you what happened? Of course not. His mother snapped. She said you were busy with work. I only learned the truth because I happened to visit your aunt and overheard Helen bragging in the courtyard about you cooking dinner for her. At that moment, the aunt in question walked in and immediately confirmed. That's right. Helen was openly boasting that you were planning to divorce Elise and marry her. Luis felt the blood drain from his body. In that instant, he understood. Helen had deliberately said those things. Why? What could she possibly gain by doing that? Luis's inner world crumbled completely. A terrifying realization began to dawn on him. Helen might not be the innocent angel he had always believed her to be. His father growled through gritted teeth. What could she gain? It's simple. If she could drive a wedge between you and Elise, she could take Elise's place and marry you. Luis shook his head in disbelief. But if she wanted to marry me, she could have done so years ago. Why go through all this trouble now? His mother, her face twisted with grief and anger, explained. Because back then, she thought she had hooked a wealthy man from the city. She looked down on you, but she later found out that man was a fraud, a gambler with no real status. She tore open a letter she had received earlier and pulled out a video recording. In the footage, Helen, who had always portrayed herself as pure and reserved in front of Luis, was wearing a flashy, revealing wedding dress, boldly wrapping her arms around the neck of a man as they kissed passionately. Around them, drunken men cheered. Brother, your wife is smoking hot. You're a lucky man. Wasn't she dating some other guy before? Helen rolled her eyes disdainfully. What boyfriend? Just some pathetic leech. If it weren't for that orphaned little brat clinging to him, I wouldn't have even bothered with Luis. Luis watched the footage again and again, his teeth grinding so hard they nearly shattered. All these years, he had believed that Helen left him back then because his parents had forced her away for Elise's sake. That's what Helen had always told him. Only now did he realize what a fool he had been. The one who was truly innocent all along wasn't Helen. It was Elise, the woman he had hurt over and over again. Chapter 7. We were always afraid that if you found out the truth, you would seek revenge for Helen and go after that man. That's why we never dared to tell you she was married. We thought that after you got married, you would gradually forget about Helen. We never imagined she would come back and cling to you again, and that you would hurt Elise over and over because of her. You think Elise owes you just because you did a few things for her, don't you? But you have no idea how much she has done for you. Every time you abandoned your family and your work for Helen, it was Elise who cleaned up the mess. She even said that you helped her because you were kind-hearted, and she didn't want to use that kindness to trap you. So she decided to give you back the right to choose your own marriage. Hearing these words, Luis closed his eyes in agony. Silent tears streamed down his face. How had everything ended up like this? He and Elise had been together for 7 years. They even had a lovely son. No, there had to be a way to fix this. I'll find Elise and bring her back. Luis searched every place he could think of where Elise might be, but she was nowhere to be found. The night was freezing. As he tightened his coat around himself, he suddenly remembered Elise's figure desperately searching for Ben through the cold night. Right after she had lost their child. How had she even managed to survive that night? As regret consumed him, he suddenly overheard a conversation between his aunt and another neighbor. Who knows what she was thinking? I saw her with my own eyes tying that yellow dog to the abandoned yard. I thought if she didn't want to keep it, I could take it for guarding the house. But when I tried, she glared at me. I was so mad. Hearing this, Luis rushed over. Auntie, who are you talking about? Seeing Luis, the woman's face stiffened awkwardly. She forced a smile. I wasn't speaking badly about Helen. It's just that. Before she could finish, Luis pressed urgently. Are you saying it was Helen who tied the dog up in that abandoned yard? The woman nodded. Confused, Luis staggered back 2 steps. His body sagged, as if all the strength had been drained from him. How could he have been so blind, believing Helen was pure and harmless for all those years? Even giving up everything to save her when he returned. No, he still had a chance to make things right. When Luis finally found me, I was busy preparing for my college entrance exams. His face was flushed with excitement as he pulled me into his arms. Elise, come home with me. Let's start over. Let's live well together. I pushed him away forcefully and calmly handed him the already approved divorce papers. The divorce certificate will be finalized soon. We are no longer husband and wife. You are free now. Free to pursue the love and marriage you truly want. I'm tired. I don't want us to keep entangling ourselves in pain and hurting each other anymore. Thank you for what you once did for me. The moment I finished speaking, Luis's eyes filled with unbearable pain. He looked at me pleadingly, his body trembling uncontrollably. In that moment, I saw in him the same Luis who, in the previous life, was heartbroken because he could never have Helen. That long, excruciating period flashed before my eyes once again. I didn't want to go through it all over again. Luis, I said gently but firmly. This is the end of us. Chapter 8. The day I went back for a medical checkup, Luis was already waiting outside the hospital early in the morning. When he heard that my body was fine and I only needed rest to fully recover, the tension on his face finally eased a little. But as soon as he remembered the lost child, regret clouded his eyes again. Seeing his expression, I tried to comfort him. Maybe it's a good thing, I said gently. This way, the baby can be born into a truly happy family next time. Luis's eyes trembled. Just as he was about to say something, Helen suddenly rushed over and threw herself into his arms, sobbing, I finally found you. Luis, you have to help me. Someone's been following me these past few days. Could you stay with me for a while? Helen had felt uneasy ever since Luis stopped visiting her. But her friends had convinced her to attend a few high society parties first. At one of those events, she ran into her fake husband, the gambler she once thought was a wealthy businessman. Knowing he still had dirt on her, Helen had no choice but to run back to Luis for help, calculating whether marrying Luis was her best option. Helen failed to notice the cold disgust already filling Luis's gaze, until Luis pushed her away. Luis? She froze in shock, then turned to me with tears streaming down her face. Elise must have misunderstood. I swear there's nothing improper between me and Luis. If you must blame someone, blame me. Please don't hate Luis. In the past, Luis would have scolded me for overreacting, but this time, he looked at Helen with nothing but icy disdain. Someone following you? Or was it your husband who finally found you? Helen, how much longer are you planning to lie? Were you proud, watching me hurt Elise for your sake over and over again? I've already found a new home for Ben. I won't let you use him as a tool anymore. If Elise hadn't found him that night, how long were you planning to keep him chained in that abandoned yard? Helen lowered her head, panic flashing across her face. She quickly wiped her tears and turned her pleading gaze toward me. Elise, I know you don't like Luis helping me. Say whatever you want about me, but don't take Ben away from me. Helen tried to use her usual tricks, but this time, they didn't work. Luis coldly pulled out the evidence of her marriage and her betrayal of me. When the video played, Helen's face went completely pale. In the wedding footage, she was dressed provocatively, passionately clinging to the so-called rich businessman, a man who was, in reality, just a penniless gambler. As she tried to think of an excuse, A group of men suddenly rushed over and surrounded her. "Helen, I finally found you," one of them shouted. "If you want to leave, fine, but pay back every cent you stole from me first." I must have been blind to fall for a woman like you. Was this little boy toy you raised with my money, pretending to be pure now? Let's talk about how open-minded you were back when you were with me. Chapter 9. Helen's face turned crimson with rage. She tore off her usual gentle mask and screamed at the man. "Where do you get the nerve to ask me for money? You promised to give me $30,000 after marriage. But your entire worthless fortune wasn't even close to that. What do you think I married you for? Your disgusting face that makes people nauseous just by looking at it? That money was compensation for what I endured. You'll never get it back." The argument quickly turned into a physical fight. The so-called rich man, worn out by years of alcohol and gambling, was no match for Helen's fury. Seeing the chaotic scene, Luis immediately pulled me behind him and led me away. We walked far from the commotion, facing the familiar streets. Luis spoke, lost in memories. "We used to walk this road together to school and back home too. Now I wish I could go back to those days. Maybe people are just too greedy." Then, he looked at me with deep sadness. "If I told you that I once saved you during the flood instead of Helen, and then traveled through time trying to fix my mistakes, would you believe me?" Luis told me about what happened in his previous life. The ridiculous part was, from his perspective, everything seemed completely different from how I had experienced it. Even now, he still didn't realize how deeply his indifference had hurt me. "I never wanted to hurt you or the child," Luis said, his voice heavy. "But every time I looked at you, I couldn't help but think of Helen, who died in the flood, and Ben, who got lost. It tormented me constantly. Those years were excruciating for me. Every day I was drowning in guilt and pain, and I ended up neglecting your feelings. Ever since we were little, I promised myself I would protect you and never let you get hurt. Yet in the end, the one who hurt you the most was me. I thought that by using the time machine to come back and change the ending, to save Helen once and for all, everything would be different. I believed that afterward, we could be together without any resentment between us. But why did it turn out like this? I saved Helen this time, but I lost you. If I had known this would be the outcome, I swear, I would never have chosen to come back." Luis gave a bitter, self-mocking smile. "You must think I'm being ridiculous," he said. I met his gaze and gave a soft, knowing laugh. Of course, I didn't think he was joking, because I had experienced it too. In the days after he left through the time machine, I was suffocating in pain and despair. My in-laws disappointed, blaming looks. My son's cold, distant attitude, so much like his father's. Every detail crushed me until I could barely breathe. When I chose to return using the time machine, I saw the hope in their eyes, the desperate longing that perhaps this time, the ending could change. So I decided to fulfill everyone's wishes, and also set myself free. People always fantasize that the road they didn't take must be more beautiful, I said quietly. But when you finally walk that path, you realize it leads to regret just the same. Now, neither Helen nor you have been hurt, and you're free from the marriage arranged by our parents. To me, this is already the best ending. Luis stared at me in panic, tears dripping onto the ground. "No," he choked out. "This isn't what I truly want." The love he had longed for so many years welled up in his eyes. But now, faced with reality, it all tasted hollow. "Luis," I said softly, "don't come looking for me again." He stood frozen in place, watching helplessly as I turned and walked away without a trace of hesitation. Chapter 10. The next 7 years of my life were completely different from the previous one. I experienced a whole new kind of existence. When work eventually brought me back to that familiar city, I realized how much the past now felt like a distant, blurry dream. If I hadn't traveled back and changed the ending, Luis would probably have tried to use the time machine again by now. At the heartfelt request of his parents, I agreed to visit Luis's home. When he saw me, his eyes flickered with shock, panic, longing. A flood of emotions twisted his expression into something almost unrecognizable. It was from his parents that I learned that not long after I left, Luis had been expelled from his job due to personal misconduct. After a long silence, Luis finally spoke. His voice strained. It seems you've been doing well these past years. I smiled lightly. Indeed. Both my career and my life had been going very smoothly. After a moment of hesitation, Luis looked at me with careful, searching eyes. You've never dated anyone else. Is it because... He didn't finish the question, but I understood. It's true, I said quietly. I haven't dated anyone, and I have no intention of finding a partner either. But that has nothing to do with you. When I was little, I watched my father remarry with indecent haste right after my mother's death. Since then, I realized that love and relationships aren't everything. Being alone is fine. Because of Luis. I had once made an exception, but there would never be a second time. The light in Luis's eyes gradually dimmed, his gaze falling to the floor as he struggled to hide the tears pooling in his eyes. Before we married, I had once told him, if our home won't be warm, then I'd rather not have one at all. In the end, he had left me cold and isolated for 7 long years. Through conversations with his parents, I also learned that Helen's life hadn't turned out well either. She had refused to work, spending her days dreaming of finding another rich man. After squandering the money she had stolen from her fake husband, she survived off the handouts of various men, but she never saw anything wrong with it. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. Until recently, the latest man she latched onto was already married. When his wife's family stormed Helen's home, they beat the man into a cripple and destroyed Helen's face. Left with no other options, Helen went crawling back to her fake husband, but he was buried in debt, and the two of them spent their days hiding from creditors, every encounter ending in another brutal beating. Hearing all of this, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of melancholy. The last time, Helen died when Luis loved her the most, forever becoming his untouchable first lover. This time, Luis successfully saved her, only to watch her rot away bit by bit before his eyes. After his parents went out, Luis sat silently, glancing at me as if he had something to say. After a long while, he finally voiced the question burning inside him. I could never understand why you changed so much. You came back from the time machine too, didn't you? I didn't deny it. There was nothing left to hide. Upon hearing my answer, Luis let out a bitter laugh. I knew it. What have I done? Why did I even come back? I really regret it, Elise. If neither of us had returned, maybe the ending would have been different. If I had saved you first this time, maybe you wouldn't have left me. Looking at his anguished expression, I said with a sigh, there are no what-ifs, Luis. Even if there were, my heart would still be the same. Look ahead, Luis. We've both been trapped in the past for far, far too long. On the day the time machine was relaunched, Luis couldn't wait to travel back again. This time, he was determined to choose Elise. He swore he would never let her get hurt again. But when he returned to the past, he found that the ending remained unchanged. 7 years, then another 7 years, again and again. Luis traveled back, only to experience the pain of losing Elise over and over. Yet he never gave up, because only by returning to that brief time when they were still together could he find the strength to keep living through the endless years. Luis looked at the staff silently, then walked quietly into the time machine once more.